Alright everyone, now we've got to celebrate a little bit because the UK is now a free and sovereign nation, well, for the most part, as of last night. I actually watched live the celebrations they were holding with Nigel Farage and others speaking. They had a countdown, sort of like it was New Year's, and it was very, very cute. Their anthem there is funny because a lot of people in the crowd, I think, were hooligans, and a lot of people, I think, there were already a little bit intoxicated. That part was a little bit funny more than anything else. No offense, but you know, when people get drunk, they sing off key usually. That was definitely the case with God Save the Queen, and it was very fun to watch. But now we have to look ahead, because I think Nigel Farage is definitely right. This will not be the last time that a country leaves the EU. You've got half a dozen other countries where approval of the EU is barely 50-50. Places like Greece, certainly. They feel wronged. Italy, I think, is on that list. Germany, ironically, and France actually is getting down towards a 50-50 sort of approval of the EU. Generally speaking, for almost every country in the European Union, approval of the Union has fallen over the last few years. There's a reason for that. It's not because of propaganda, provocation, Russia, and all the usual, the scapegoats of the establishment. It's because Europe doesn't work. Here I'm sitting in the European Union, in one of the most pro-EU countries, by the way, here in the Netherlands. I don't see any real fervor here for a Nexit. If I had to guess, I'd say it really depends on which one do you expect to be worst over the next 10 years. Economic downturns for the less fortunate nations in Europe, or violence and the resurgence of religious fanaticism in the more developed parts. Because depending on which you expect, I would say probably Italy or Sweden would be the next ones that I would envision would be likely to leave. Also, potentially France, but here's the problem. The globalists will fight a lot more hard to maintain control over France, because France is a nuclear power with a substantially developed economy. It's one of the haves in the EU, so it contributes more than it gets out in a fiscal sense. They'll be reluctant. When you look at Eastern Europe, you see immigration primarily as the issue. When you look at Northern and Western Europe, you see crime and assimilation issues. And then Southern and East and Southeastern Europe, it's primarily about money. They don't want austerity. They want to be socialistic. Greece has already fought with the EU, with Germany specifically, for years over that before finally buckling down, doing what it needed to do. Ironically, I think that I probably agree most with the Northwestern Europeans there, in which primarily, it's not really an issue of migrants temporarily there if you've got an assimilation rate, but there's no attempt to make that happen. There's been no attempt by many of the more developed European countries to make sure that the people coming into their countries will actually obey the law, because it's seen as racist or wrong or evil or inhospitable to outsiders to insist that that be the case. And as far as the economic proposals, you can understand why a country that has more wealth would be tired of propping up countries with less, even if those countries with less wealth in part are like that because of the EU. The EU is holding Eastern Europe back, for example. They think that them getting handouts from Western Europe is helping. It's not. It's depressing your economies. You should be the first to leave. Poland and Hungary and all these others that are very pro-EU usually, because it benefits them at that fiscal level. The free movement that benefits your ability to go elsewhere to get a job that pays more while sending remittances to your family ultimately is little more than a roundabout welfare system. You do realize that. I think that the EU will shatter over the next decade. I would expect probably won't even really exist in its current form. I'm not proclaiming that it's going to go the way of the dinosaur. What's more likely to happen is Germany and possibly France maintain a group of vassal states that they use for slave labor. And that's basically what you'll end up seeing. With the Netherlands probably staying in as the banking capital of Europe, and then Belgium hosting Brussels, of course, sort of as the seat of bureaucratic hand-wringing, and then Germany and France bankrolling a smaller sphere. I think you'll see Scandinavia leave. I think you'll see chunks of Western and Southern Europe leave. And ultimately, the EU will still be there, but it will be much diminished. It'll be a German vassal, essentially, which is what Merkel wants now anyway. There's a reason why Merkel takes all sides on all issues. She's constantly trying to parlay things into her own benefit, which leaders tend to do anyway, but she does it through attempting to censor her opponents and spy on them usually. Merkel is the worst leader in Europe, her and then Macron second to that, personally. I think that it's not in anyone's benefit to stay in Europe. Again, I say this as someone who wants Europe to do well, and Farage has echoed this many times, that the whole goal is to have a Europe that works together without having the legalistic side of it. You can have diplomacy and free movement and all of these other things with simple bills that you've agreed upon, simple treaties. You don't need an EU. Brussels doesn't have to exist at all. You don't need MPs and all this. You just need normal diplomacy. Other parts of the world have hammered it out. Look, there's free movement in North America. You can get a very, very simple to get expanded driver's license in the U.S. You can go across the Canadian or Mexican border anytime and do whatever you want. You can travel there. You can stay there for extended periods on various visa statuses or non-visa travel in that particular case. You can buy property. You can invest. You can do all sorts of stuff. You can commute to and from work in Canada, potentially, if you really wanted to do that. You can do all these things. We don't need a North American Union to do that. It's not necessary. And it's a much bigger union as far as geographic area. That's the whole fucking North American continent, practically, is all united with free movement, free trade for the most part, USMCA now kicking in, and all of these other auspices, and it's wonderful. It's a good thing and it benefits people. We didn't need to create a post-national authority to achieve that. We didn't need a post-national authority in which you'd have delegates from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico getting together in a third-party state in order to make rules that everyone would have to live by, bypassing our own respective constitutional premises. We don't need that. Neither does Europe. The European people are smart and peace-loving enough to do that without the EU. So the EU is vestigial. I mean, it made sense. Again, it's much like with U.S. immigration the way it is. It made sense in the 1960s. You're trying to outflank the Soviets. You got a lot of underused or unused land and resources. You need more manpower. You're trying to outflank the communists in diplomacy by making yourself look more inclusive. It made sense at the time. It no longer does. We don't have the free land and there's no communism to fight. Well, there's no Soviet Union, at least, to fight. You don't need the immigration reforms of the mid-1960s in the U.S. anymore. They don't make sense fiscally. They don't make sense diplomatically. The EU made sense when it was first incepted. It's sort of a counterpart to the NATO, the Western Sphere thing. You don't need that anymore. There's no Soviet Union to prop it up anyway. It's just going to fall into infighting. So get rid of the European Union, form simple treaties, simple diplomatic maneuvers are employed to gain free movement for people to be able to do visa-free travel the way they do anyway, to be able to trade and travel and do some degree of work over national borders and leave it at that. You don't need a migrant crisis. You don't need austerity in Southern Europe. Let them be socialistic. Who cares? You don't need handouts from Western Europe. Who cares? You don't need that. Just let them inflate their currency and be socialistic if they want to. If Eastern Europe wants to limit immigration, so be it. So long as there's free movement in the touristic, the topical sense. If they don't want to have people coming in, taking jobs, who cares if the Hungarians want a Hungary first business platform? Who cares? It's their country. Let them do that, essentially. You can have all of these things without the EU even existing. By the way, make Nigel Farage Prime Minister. The UK would be far better off. It's funny to see the mountain of salt being cried right now by the Ramoners, by the globalistic folks, by the people who don't realize that they're endorsing oligarchic tyranny. That's about all. Peace out.